Thanks. Morning, everybody. Daniel, are you putting the slides up?
Yes, I'll put them on.
Okay, great stuff. Morning, everybody. My name's Phil Green. I'm Director at Lancashire County Council. I'm not the main attraction today. That is my colleagues, Mike and Daniel, and I've just lost my screen, so apologies. Just bear with me a second. There we go. Back. The main purpose of the presentation today is to share the initial key findings of our independent economic review in the context of our work to prepare a greater Lancashire plan. We've been sharing emerging Lancashire evidence with government since Christmas, including through a series of meetings with Bayes, Minister Paul, Scully MP, and we really want to mainstream the constructive working with government officials in the months ahead as we further develop this granular evidence base, conclude our analytics and look to shape the policy development. So Daniel, can you just skip on to the third slide, please? Mm-hmm. Perfect, thank you. So just briefly before I hand over to Mike, from a Lancashire perspective, we know that Lancashire has major and unique contribution to make to the UK economy, yet we also know it risks falling behind other regions. Lancashire leaders have demonstrated a commitment and ambition to speak with one voice through the development of a greater Lancashire plan. The granular evidence base we are gathering, including the Independent Economic Review and Environment Commissions, will underpin the strategic decision-making of Lancashire leaders in consultation with key stakeholders. Allowing leaders to set the overarching vision this way for a place and people-based strategy and action plan for Lancashire will give us a consistent, compelling and coherent narrative as a foundation from which all our plans in Lancashire can then be rooted. So without further ado, can I hand over to Mike Emmerich to introduce the Independent Economic Review and take us through the initial findings. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil, and thank you all for asking us to speak, and above all to Phil and his colleagues for asking our company, Metro Economics, to work with you on this review. So the idea of an independent economic review, I think, is one that I can probably claim more credit for than most, because I did the first one when I was working at New Economy in Manchester, now part of the Combined Authority. And we did the Manchester Independent Economic Review more years ago now than I care to remember. And it's an art form that I learned when I was a Treasury civil servant. We've done it in Cambridgeshire, helped their new Combined Authority find its feet, and now closer to home in Lancashire. We're a little company based in Manchester and London, and all we do is about place. Our thing is basically helping people in places across the country to make the very best they can of the assets and the opportunities, and to deal with the problems. And so delighted to be doing this. What you're looking at here is from our website, the microsite we've set up, lancashire.org, because we're at a pivotal moment in the review, which we started at the turn of the year, back end of last year. And the idea of this independent economic review is to take a panel of external experts, chaired by Rowena Burns, with the likes of Howard Bernstein, formerly Chief Executive of Manchester, Rachel Cooper from Lancaster University and others, to take this independent panel and independent research to hold a mirror up to Lancashire and to say those things to the county that it needs to hear for its future. Some of them will be welcome and viewed positively. Some of them may be viewed negatively and may be viewed as undesirable, but they'll all be important because this group of independent people with the evidence that we and others are putting together are there to help you make the right decision. So this is not a report by Phil Green or Angie Ridgewell. It's a report of, this is the work of the independent review, the independent panel, and it's a report to the county to which you as parliamentarians and indeed the local authorities will in due course respond. As I said, we're at a key moment now, which I'll say more about in a minute. The idea is that after the initial findings that we're publishing about now, there'll be a period of consultation, and then in summer there'll be the final report. So let's just look at this in a bit more detail. We spent the winter months when there was even less to do than usual, with our heads stuck in the data, looking at what every report, every bit of data we can find to try and paint the best picture we can of Lancashire. Because we know that in the end, this is not a report we want to sit on a shelf, but it's one we want the councils and the local enterprise partnership and all businesses to engage with, to listen to, and to act upon. We've had conversations with councils, all the councils in Lancashire already, and are starting this conversation through consultation. And we're publishing the initial findings this week. Daniel will
tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow it will be.
Tomorrow. So and we'll send that initial findings document around everybody. And the idea is not that report is foundational. It's not got anything controversial in it, we hope, if the facts are what they are. But what we do here is to paint a picture of and the platform on which we're going to build all the work that follows. And you'll see in the spring, which I think we're now officially in, we've got engagement with MPs. I'm ticking that off a bit today. Call for evidence via the microsite that I've mentioned. We're going to talk again with councils and with businesses, and we really want to get a handle on what people think are the important issues, and to get feedback on the analysis we put out there and the questions we've been asking. But the real meat of the review is in the deep dives, because you can't apply equal attention to everything. You have to think about what might be some of the key issues to look at. And we've alighted on this group of 5 areas. Firstly, the economic geography and the future of towns. Clearly, Lancashire is a polynucleated place. It's not London or Manchester with a big socking great city in the middle of it. It's much more complex than that. And more than that, a lot of the county looks outwards towards Cumbria or Greater Manchester or Merseyside, not inwards. So we need to understand that. We need to understand the trajectories of what's going on in different towns, who's faring well and less well, etc. We're looking at infrastructure. We're not trying here to tell you what your infrastructure priorities will be, though I think the panel may wish to comment on that in due course. Here, what we're really interested in is looking at how Lancashire's infrastructure works and how you as a county go about making decisions about what your future infrastructure priorities should be. I guess if there's a hypothesis here, it's that having the particular constellation of public authorities you've got may not necessarily in and of itself lead you to maximise the share of infrastructure anywhere in the county, and that's something we want to take a good hard look at. We're going to look at health, wealth and well-being, and that's obviously health, education, skills, life chances, and a real focus, which you'll see in the data in a minute, will be on what COVID has done on those issues. And you will not be surprised to learn that we think this is a critical issue. We're looking at advanced manufacturing, because you are particularly dependent on manufacturing as a county, much more than many areas that we work in. And internationalisation, which is the key to ensuring that you've got the ability to sell goods and services to the rest of the world and to bring external visitors in to spend money in the county. So those deep dives, which we're leading research on, will be the subject of a lot of discussion with the commissioners, the independent review panel. And out of those will come the publication of a final report in the summer with key recommendations which will be taken forward into the Greater Lancashire Plan, which I will say more about in a second, and hopefully be a really important document in crystallising public debate, public engagement around the future of the county. Now, if that isn't complicated enough, this doesn't stand on its own. So if you go to the next slides, what you'll see is that all of the work that I've described, including the LEP strategic work on economy and sectors, all of that is feeding into the independent economic review, but also into informing the Environment Commission you're about as a county to kick off and work on public service reform, all of which are designed to inform the Greater Lancashire Plan. And I have to say, I'd say take my hat off. Well, I would if I had. I'll take my metaphorical hat off to your public service leaders, because I think what you've got here is as comprehensive an approach to thinking through what you do in this incredibly important and in some ways challenging time through these 3 different streams of work culminating in the Greater Lancashire Plan. very, very important time, very important work that should stand you in good stead. So to key findings. What this slide shows is effectively the path of the Lancashire economy over a decade from before the financial crash up to the last point at which data is available. And what it really shows you is that Lancashire has had its, what you really want to be is above the line, the sort of 45-degree line that's going out in the top right-hand quadrant. You can see you kind of, you did not have a good response to the 2008-2009 recession. The recovery was slow and it was variable. But importantly, it was picking up pace. And one of the things that I've noticed as a Mancunian who travels through Lancashire quite a bit, or certainly did until this time last year, was a real sense of momentum. And yes, you saw it on the M6 corridor, but you saw it up the Colne Valley and in Blackpool and elsewhere. And this is borne out in the data. What you can see is that Lancashire was really roaring ahead in that sort of period after about 2015, with the growth outpacing other parts of the Northwest and making a serious inroads into closing the productivity gap with the rest of the UK, with aerospace and pharmaceuticals playing a particularly heavy role as part of a manufacturing sector that plays a much larger role in Lancashire than it does in most other parts of the UK. So you needed COVID like a hole in the head. We all needed COVID like a hole in the head. But to the extent that you've suffered from COVID, and no doubt you have as well, and we'll see, this was playing into a rising tide of an economy, and it's vital that we look at how that can be re-established in the period ahead. Next slide, please. So what do we know about how COVID has affected you? And I have to say, because official data is not absolutely spectacular, and at the local level, it's pretty weak. We've actually commissioned some data from mobile phone providers to help augment the official data and data like these. But we have got some pretty good data from Google Analytics, which we've analysed and offered to you here. And what this shows is what's happened to these four key metrics of retail and recreation, essential retail, public transport and workplaces in the period since the first lockdown was announced exactly a year ago. And it's all indexed, so these are all relatives over this period. They don't tell you anything about absolutes. I guess the takeaway here is essential retail has come back reasonably well. It was coming back very strongly until the lockdowns at the end of last year, and is crawling back up to something like normality. But in every other respect, what you can see is that workplaces, which are the yellow, and public transport and non-essential retail have been pretty hard hit. And though it's not written here, our analysis says that Lancashire has been more affected than most of the UK in terms of these economic impacts that we're seeing here, but also in terms of health. And there's more on that in the initial findings that we're announcing, that we're releasing tomorrow. Of course, one of the reasons for that is probably second only to Greater Manchester, said he, speaking from Manchester. You've had worse lockdown conditions than anything else, with pretty much the entire year being in lockdown, apart from the 4-week period for the Rule of 6. So I mentioned that Lancashire's got a very diverse base, and you can see that in the way that the economy is being affected in different places. In the next slide, please. Because of course the COVID has happened at a point of inflection for the UK economy as a result of Brexit. And it's, there are potential long-term gains, but there were always, I think most people would accept, likely to be some transitional impacts from Brexit. And what this does is to show, using our analysis of Bank of England data, where we think, compared to the UK average, the incidence of Brexit could be felt in a positive or indeed a negative sense. And what you can see is that some parts of the economy, South Ribble Valley and Fylde, Rossendale, West Lancashire, sound to be more affected. Blackpool, Preston, Hyndburn, Blackburn with Darwen, less so. I guess the critical issue is that we don't have all the data yet, but I'm going to come on to talk about one or two bits in a minute. The critical thing that we're going to have to try and do, because if we don't know whether the French Revolution was a success or not, to quote Juin Lau after the Second World War, then we certainly don't know whether the economic impact of Brexit is going to be largely transitional and neutral to positive or negative. Suffice it to say that coming alongside COVID, there are already enough downside risks on the economy that is likely to be a particular problem at the moment. Next slide, please. What we've looked at here is health, because one of the factors that places like Lancashire and everywhere that was part of the former industrial heartlands of England, and indeed Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland too, have faced is very significant health outcomes, significantly poor health outcomes arising from poverty and deprivation. And these are important to a piece of work like this, because poor health is a massive impact for economies. It weighs on economic output, reducing labour market participation. It weighs on skill levels, because people who have poor health records tend to have lower skills. And of course, it creates more demands on what are already very stretched local government and indeed health services. And our view is that in the wake of COVID-19, this merits further analysis. What we do know is that over a quarter of the neighbourhoods in Lancashire fall into England's bottom 10, but they are also juxtaposed against some of the most affluent and agreeable parts of our country. And the deep dive that we're going to do on health, wealth and wellbeing has really got to look at those statistics and at what innovation in healthcare can do to drive positive change and to help people to get the leg up they need to stand on their own 2 feet and fulfil their potential in the labour market. One of the things that, and I'm going to take no credit for this, next slide, this is very much the work of my colleague Daniel, who was represented here. I think probably the single most important thing that we've established in this baseline review and in the initial findings, which is that 50% of Lancashire's population live within 2 miles of that transport corridor that runs from Blackpool North up the Colne Valley. And you can see that much of the population lives within a further 21% within another 5-mile buffer zone. I must confess, I didn't know that. I've lived around this part of the world most of my life, apart from a stint in London. And that is not something I knew. And maybe the reason I suspect other people don't know it, is because it isn't something, I don't think it's how Lancashire tends to think about itself. And more to the point, it's very much not how the transport and other infrastructure, or indeed the planning of the county has worked. A point that Phil Green makes to us repeatedly.
I think it's an hour altogether.
Is that, I don't know if that's that it's quicker to get from Preston to Lancaster than it is from Preston to Blackburn, despite the latter being a good deal closer. And if that central belt, just think about the central belt of Scotland, for example, compared to this central belt of Lancashire, and think how the central belt has driven Scottish policy over generations. I don't think this idea of a central belt is something that has really. I'd love to know what you as parliamentarians and indeed business people think on this in this meeting. But we think this is something that's kind of important, and we know that east-west travel is a problem across the whole country. North-south is, or rather, radiating out from London is basically it was what the Romans did, and it's what we're still doing in the UK. East-west travel remains a problem, whether it's Carlisle to Newcastle, whether it's Manchester to Leeds and Sheffield, whether it's Leeds to Hull, but it certainly seems to be true of Lancashire, and that's something that we want to think about the importance of. One of the things I'm keen to find, though I haven't yet to find it, is a study that looks at what the impact of the M65 motorway was, because we should be seeing whether or not that has had an economically significant impact. It looks to me as if it has. I'm sure it looks to you as if it has. But I'd like to see a study that looks at the economics in a more fundamental way. Next slide, please. More key findings. One of the most diverse counties in the country. As I said, it's polycentric. Some of the best agricultural land and natural capital in the country, as well as industrial zones, coastal areas. Climate change represents a real threat, not least to the natural capital and agricultural land. We do a lot of work in Cambridgeshire in the Fens, and you've got exactly the same issues in the western part of the county. Your output is lower than it needs to be. You know that. We know that. If output per head in Lancashire reached the English average, you'd be 10 billion more in terms of output, putting more into the national economy than you are. And critical to that, although the health issues that I raised are important, very important indeed, bigger than that is the issue of low in-work productivity. So this is something about your sectoral mix, and it is a fact in the UK that economies that are more reliant on manufacturing tend to have lower productivity, because not enough of our manufacturing is at the higher end, though you've got some very, very good manufacturing. So tackling that low in-work productivity problem is definitely an issue, because it's more significant, as this slide says, than age structure, employment rate, or sectoral structure combined. And key to that is going to be the skills system, the HEFE system, where you've got phenomenally successful universities in Lancaster and Central Lancs. You've got some of the highest performing FE colleges in the country, very strong FE colleges. The problem is, as we've already begun to find as we looked at the data, but we'll be doing more work on this, is that not enough of the people who need the skills are getting access to the courses they need to get jobs in high productivity occupations and sectors, and that is fundamental to your economic well-being in the future. I'm not the world's greatest fan of economic forecasts, because as one economist famously said, it's a bit like driving through the rear view mirror. But here is what Cambridge Econometrics have produced, and this is as good a guide as you'll find anywhere. If you look at the left-hand side, what is clear is that there is a gap in productivity, both with Great Britain as a whole and within the Northwest, and obviously the gap with the UK is bigger. And it's not neither are projected to close in the periods ahead. If you wish to avoid a decline scenario, one of the things that you very much need to do is to enhance productivity and employment in the manufacturing sector, whilst transforming it to spearhead zero efforts. And just to give you one illustration of how Brexit could play into this in the short term, it's vital that the new markets internationally open up, because one of the things that we've established is that, for example, Lancashire has total food and animal products exports of around $250 million a year, and around 200 million of that is to the EU. And if the initial statistics we've seen are right, that has been virtually wiped out as a result of the transaction costs of Brexit, then it's to be hoped that comes back, and that we can really look to find where the new markets are as well as to consolidate those existing markets in the period ahead. Moving towards the end now. So, Daniel, if you just move to the next. That's a sort of a counter through some of the initial findings, and Daniel and I, Daniel's the sort of stato of the team who can help with more facts and what have you. So if we just look at these step by step, what we've got is in March this month, we're publishing the initial findings, we're starting the deep dives, we've got the call for evidence, the website, and the Environment Commission launches too. And in this period, you know, whether you're a business leader or a parliamentarian, your engagement with this is something that we really, really welcome. I'm sure I speak for Jeff Driver and everyone from the County Council and the other local authorities in saying that. This is not the County Council's economic review, it's Lancashire's, and everyone has a role to play in making sure that we're asking the right questions and answering them with the best evidence we can find. Over spring, there'll be further findings from the evidence base shared as they emerge. The independent panels meeting regularly, and individual members of it are taking different issues and working on them. The final reports of both this and the Environment Commission are due in the late spring, early summer. And then over summer, the review will be given to the final report of the review will be given to the public authorities and others, and it will be down to each of them and indeed to each of you to respond to it. All of which is with a view to influencing the government spending review and to getting on later this year and into next year with the publication of the Greater Lancashire Plan. So I'm going to shut up there. I think you've heard quite enough from me, but Daniel and I and Phil and others are here to answer your questions.
Thanks, Mike. Kat, do you want to chair the Q&A session?
Simon, I can do. I'm obviously just like a backbench member of this APPG. I'm not an office holder or anything, but if that's agreeable, I think Rosie's finished her Health and Social Care Select Committee. Gosh, that's a mouthful, isn't it, Rosie? So we are joined by our West Lancashire MP. Yeah. So can I kick it off maybe by asking the first question, if that's okay, Simon? Which is about obviously one of the biggest assets that we have is always the people that live here in Lancashire, and I've got to ask this as a Foul Coast MP, the health inequalities that we have on the Foul Coast, and I'm the MP for Fleetwood, you know, are a huge have a huge impact on our local economy. And I just wondered if perhaps Mike, you'd be able to say a little bit more about what you thought some of the solutions to that were. One of the initiatives that we've done in Fleetwood is around the Healthier Fleetwood project, which is about empowering local communities to actually lead that, and it'd be something that we do for ourselves rather than something that's done to us in terms of trying to turn around the health outcomes of the population. And I just wondered whether or not you were aware of it, and what your kind of thoughts were on that as a model of trying to sort of turn around health inequalities. But I'm aware that Rosie is also very knowledgeable on health issues, so she might well come in with something that's a very similar question. So if I throw that in, and should we take a group of questions? And then perhaps we can have some responses. If you want to indicate with the raise hand function, that's always the easiest way for me to see who wants to ask a question, or just wave furiously at the screen. Just don't all wave at once. Aha, Robert Binns, you want to ask a question?
Yeah. On looking through that, one of the things that we didn't see was anything on investment, so you know, funding, sort of venture funding, other bits of stuff like that. You know, how the county fares in attracting investment, and what our plan is to get more investment as well.
I'm not seeing anyone else indicate that they want to. Oh yes, Angie, go for it, Angie.
Thanks, Kat. And I attended a meeting yesterday with Minister Scully at Bays, and Catherine O'Connell was there as well. I think I might reflect back to the group that some of our civil servants take a slightly different interpretation of the statistics and might actually argue that some of Lancashire's high streets have actually performed incredibly well during the COVID crisis. I think some of that is driven by not understanding the economics of Lancashire and thinking that football relates to spend, and equally the fact that because many of our high streets are just essential retail, they have very little non-essential retail, you can't compare that with some of the big cities. So I'd really be interested, Mike, in your take and how we might be best able to use the evidence to help our policymakers really understand what's driving the economies in Lancashire. Thank you.
Should I come back on those three, Kat?
That'd be great, Mike. Go for it.
So, firstly, I'm not aware of the initiative you've got in Fleetwood. I'm interested to know more because I don't think any of us. I think this catches England, probably the whole UK, on a bit of a weak spot. And if there's not many questions, so let's get a bit of controversy going. I think we rightly celebrate what is good about the NHS, but it is a sickness service, not a health service. I think everything that Public Health England has done, everything Michael Marmot has told us in more reports than I care to remember, is that everything that really matters statistically, other than the dealing with acute problems in hospitals, lies outside of those hospitals. It's not, once someone's in a hospital, it's too late for many things, and whether it's the social care that local authorities are able to provide, whether it's the income inequalities, whether it's housing, poor housing conditions, all these things, poor education, poor diet, all these things accumulate. And particularly in places where there are large concentrations of poor people living in relatively poor housing, to create situations that even the best secondary healthcare system cannot deal with. And nowhere that I know of has really found a good way out of that. If I were to speculate where this is, where I'm a researcher writing reports on this, and it'll be for the panel, but where I would like to lead the panel is to start to think even more creatively about this than the government has done so far. So, for example, one of the things that I want to talk about is retrofit of housing, because if we think about the housing stock of a county like Lancashire, a very disproportionate amount of it is pre-1919. A lot of it's terraced. A lot of it was built cheaply and hasn't been properly maintained. A lot of it is lived in by people who have fuel poverty, people in high densities, high population densities. In some communities, in some parts of the county, multi-generational families with low incomes and precarity of incomes, which has driven people to work through the pandemic in conditions where probably health would have suggested otherwise. And all of that points to me towards a solution that isn't a health solution, it isn't a housing solution, it isn't an environment solution. It's something that's about retrofitting housing, because if people are living in that sort of housing, then you can do the other things, and you're never going to fix the problems of fuel poverty, of high infection rates, etc., etc., etc. Whereas a retrofit program done correctly would generate skills, intermediate skills, low skills, actually quite advanced skills. It would kickstart the construction sector, which some parts of which are in trouble at the moment. So that's the sort of big thinking, alongside more traditional things that you would think about in terms of pure health. I think we should be thinking about, because you don't tackle these sorts of health inequalities just by tackling health. You've got to root them in the economy. I'm going to ask Daniel to come back on investment. And on Angie's point on high streets, this is one of the things that we've really got to dig into. I think I suspect what we're seeing in Lancashire, we're certainly seeing this in other parts of the country we've looked at, is that COVID has exacerbated a lot of pre-existing trends which are driving some places to be more successful, some high streets to be more successful, and driving others further into difficulty. And if that is the case, and I'd be surprised if that wasn't the case in Lancashire, knowing some of the more challenged as well as some of the more attractive town centres that you have, the really interesting question is what can the independent review say about what is to be done? And I think we're going to need to be a lot more creative in thinking about town centres. I think, Karen, forgive me for maligning your industry, but I'm sure not your bit of it. But I think a lot of property professionals are thinking far too conventionally about the high street. It really isn't about traditional buildings, traditional offices, traditional jobs. We've got to rethink what towns are for if they've been dependent on retail that has gone or retail that is going and probably won't be coming back. Much more about where people live, much more about leisure when leisure comes back, about culture, about connectivity, and less necessarily about retail and jobs. But that's easy to say and applies differently in different places, and will be hard to do. And that's sort of where our hard work lies. But can I ask Daniel to come back on Robert's question on investment?
Yeah, and thank you for raising it, Robert, because it is a gap at the moment, and it's somewhere we've been looking for data, and it's quite hard to get sort of official data on investment broken down by region. So I'm really keen to get more information and hear from those who know about the business landscape in Lancashire. A lot of people have reflected the concern you raise of insufficient private investment and other investment. One thing we have picked up on is levels of spending on research and development. And Lancashire is not bottom of the table, but it is in the sort of bottom half. And in particular, we've noticed not a lot of government spending on research and development. So good initiatives going on with universities linking up the local business clusters, and that's really positive. But one of our main findings at the moment is that more central government funding is needed to supercharge some of that research and development that's going on. I just take this moment as well to flag on the website, we've got a call for evidence that's just launching with this review as well. And that's somewhere where you can send in any evidence or information which you think the review needs to hear. So please have a look at lancashire.org and you can send through any findings you think we need to be aware of. Thanks.
Just a flag, it's 11:52, and obviously at midday we've got a national minute silence. So with the meeting's permission, it'd be good to sort of wrap up just before 12, if that's all right with colleagues. Bill Green, you've indicated that you want to ask a question.
Thanks, Kat. It was actually just to build on Robert's question on the investment plan. So one thing that we are doing Pan Lancashire is we're in the process of shaping a major development and infrastructure plan to attract investment to Lancashire. Now, the opportunities on that pipeline actually total £15 billion. This is something that soon Lancashire will be really starting to shout about in terms of attracting investment. So this includes those shovel-ready transformational projects such as Eden Project North, really important, but it also includes major developments across the region from Blackpool, Lancashire Central to the Clean Energy Park at Springfield, or the 4 enterprise zones that are already attracting investment and stimulating economic recovery. And of course, we've got an AMRC under construction at Samsbury Enterprise Zone. So that 15 billion pipeline includes all our major infrastructure, road, rail, utilities, digital and energy. And we're really looking to maximise the strength of our business base and create opportunities for our workforce through delivering that pipeline. So there's a real investment opportunity. So Robert's question is a really good one. Thank you.
Does anyone else want to indicate?
I think Sue Grindrod
has her hand up.
Ah, sorry, Sue.
Hi. Can I just ask a question about the visitor economy and how important it is for Lancashire? I mean, I live on the coastline, so it's very close to my heart. And we know the visitor economy has taken a huge hit in terms of the effects of the pandemic. And particularly, there are already issues in the visitor economy in terms of, you know, low-level job opportunities, skill development, seasonal jobs. But in terms of Lancashire, I know you said about the manufacturing sector and concentrating on that, but how important is the visitor economy to Lancashire?
Daniel, do you have the stats on that?
I'll have to read them out. I mean, I think as an employer, very significant, as you know, Sue. Probably not equally across Lancashire, but in specific parts of the county. You're absolutely right. I think the sector has been very affected. I suppose more positively, one piece of evidence we've had from Blackpool is kind of sense over the summer of a wider catchment for visitors from the UK, possibility of building in more staycation type activity in future. I think again, it's why the Eden North is a fantastic project, because it looks to help have that visitor economy, but without some of the associated seasonal type stuff, and build in more of the skills and so on. So yeah.
Can I add to that, Daniel? I mean, I haven't looked recently at the list of investment priorities that Phil Green was just talking about, but one of the things that I'd be really interested to see is to kick the tires on what you've got on the visitor economy. You know, have you got investable propositions? You clearly have in the Eden project, that's for sure. But elsewhere on that coastline and other tourist places, have you got readily investable projects that a private sector investor, or indeed the government, could look at that and say, okay, if I want X, that's the project for it? Because I think my sense is that I absolutely agree. It's a really important sector, but sometimes you find that the importance is out of kilter with the deliverability of the projects that would recognise and invest in that importance for the future. And as Daniel said, there's a great opportunity right now.
I think the problem for the visitor economy, it's always been low on productivity. It's really hard for the visitor economy to show productivity and the way it contributes to the economy. And yet, looking at case studies, particularly, you know, in Lancashire and on the Fylde coast, and Blackpool being a really good example, you've got to really take that quite seriously. I mean, you know, I've worked in Liverpool as well, and Liverpool's done a really good job in terms of creating Culture Liverpool. I know Rachel, I think Rachel's on the call here. There's some great objectives for marketing Lancashire. But I think that's a really good question. You know, what projects have you got that are oven ready and that could be taken forward as part of this review?
Can I just check, Karen Hurst, did you want to ask a question, or were you reacting in agreement with someone earlier?
It was a bit of both, really. I'm just a bit conscious of time, but it was more, Phil led in nicely to it. I think it's how we can, I suppose, work with the work you're doing, Mike, and the Independent Economic Review, etc., to present to government where the need is to support some of the projects that are needed to open up and help, whether it's the visitor economy, business, or living and working. You know, it's all of that really. And we're a Lancashire business who've supported a lot of that activity, but there are some challenges, which is across the country, in terms of viability for some projects. And the other thing I was just going to ask Mike, obviously he did the work previously in Manchester, but with Lancashire being more polycentric in terms of the towns, do you think that's a disadvantage in terms of making a pitch to government? Because one city centre with all the key facts and figures and talent is one story, but when you've got that spread out over a county, how do you deal with that? How can we pull a strong story together on that?
I think it is harder, Karen, and I think you've got to work harder together is the short answer. And that's one of the things I think will come out of this review, some suggestions for how you might do that.
Thanks. It's 11:58. I think it's probably appropriate to sort of wrap things up so that we can all observe the minute silence. So I just want to thank colleagues for coming along, and hopefully there's an opportunity, perhaps, Simon, for us to, if we want to come by you, to get any contact details for colleagues to follow up anything. I'm sure that could be facilitated. But I'd like to say it's an opportunity to thank everyone for coming along to the all-party group on Lancashire this morning. And yeah, I suppose really just to mark the fact that obviously it's a year since the lockdown, and we'll remember the lives lost over the past year. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
If you enjoyed that video, then please subscribe to our YouTube channel on the link below, and be among the first to get to listen to all the latest interviews through the Downtown Den.